Hola a los que se van conectando. ¿Pudieran confirmarme que se escuche bien, porfas? Y déjenme... ¿Todo cool? Vale, vale. Hi, Sohee.
Hi, Daniel. How are you?
I'm really honored to have you today. I hope,
Oh, thanks.
first and foremost, I hope Ollie is doing better.
He's actually sleeping by my feet right now. So, yes, he is recovering. Thanks.
That's very cool. How old is he?
He is 8.5. So, he's past middle age, I think, at this point for a dog. So, that's why I'm
They get so
concerned when he started
they
feeling sick.
yeah, sure they get so cute with their little
They're
eyes.
so cute. Yeah. And he's got
Like
like white, like his beard's turning white and everything. So, it's sad, but it's cute too.
Very well. So thanks in advance for your time. I know how incredibly busy you are. I don't really know how you manage to do all that you do. So it's really a huge honor. It's really a privilege to have you here. So if you don't mind, shall we begin?
Of course.
Very well. So let me introduce you briefly. For those of you that don't know, I don't know anyone that doesn't know of Sohee. You are actually studying a PhD, right? You're in the
Yes.
process of getting your
Yeah. It's
PhD.
distance program, but yeah.
You also have a master's degree in psychology.
Yes.
And you have worked with thousands and thousands of clients. And as far as I remember, you actually competed in bikini, right?
I did briefly, but that was several years ago. It's not something I do anymore. I probably won't do it again. But yeah, I did compete a couple of times and powerlifted as well. Fun experience.
Oh, you did powerlifting? I didn't
I
know
did
that.
powerlifting. Yeah, I
Oh,
did two meets.
that's pretty cool.
And my strength, like it was decent for my size, but definitely nowhere near like elite levels or anything. But then I got injured at some point, and since then I've kind of shied away from going too heavy on certain lifts. But yeah, it's
Very well.
yeah.
Very well. So here the topic I wanted to touch today is the psychology of dieting because I know that's right up your alley.
Yeah.
And the first thing I like to discuss with you, it's mostly the mindset. How can we begin to understand the mindset and the behavior change? For instance, I'm sorry, when some people try to go on a diet, why do some people succeed and why do some people fail? What is the difference between the mindset and how can
Yeah.
we begin to talk about instead of mindsets, behavior change?
Okay, so a lot of my mistakes people make when going into any endeavor. So dieting obviously is a good example because something that many people can relate to. And I like to talk about probably the most common mindset mistakes people make tend to be related to the all or nothing mentality, which is then closely linked with the perfectionistic mentality, perfectionism. And the other one is, which is like something I talked about just recently, which is fixed versus growth mindset. So the first one, all or nothing, is the idea that if you're going to do it, you may as well go all out, right? Be super extreme. And it's very much like, well, I'm going to cut out all these foods out of my diet, slash my calories, make them super low, crank up the cardio and do all these things. And if I miss one session or if I deviate from my plan a little bit, then they're like, I quit, right? Then they're like, oh, well, it's not worth it. I may as well eat a platter of cookies and come back tomorrow or the next week and try again. And that is very tightly linked to like binge eating behaviors, for example, and other disordered eating symptoms and behaviors. And what is interesting about that is actually counterproductive to making progress. So there's that. Next one is perfectionism, simply the need for everything to be perfect, right? And then the last one, which is fixed mindset, is the idea that if you don't get something right on the first try, or if you're not good at something right away, then it's not even worth trying. And that rests on the premise that, the incorrect premise that our intelligence and our skills and talents are fixed, and wherever they start at is where they will end at, and there's no point in trying to change it because it won't move. Versus growth mindset, where you are open to learning from mistakes, and you, instead of giving up when you mess up somewhere, you get curious and you're more likely to be like, well, that didn't work. let me try to understand why so I can do better moving forward. And so that mindset allows people to get less frustrated when things aren't going quite the way they expect, which, by the way, is a totally normal part of the fitness process. Very rarely do things go to plan because that's just life. So if you're able to have a more flexible mindset, the psychological flexibility is really important in allowing you to adjust your plans and pivot when life happens instead of just throwing in the towel. Like, let's say if you plan to eat a certain way throughout the day, you have your meals planned out, but then like something gets derailed, right? You get invited out to social plans, or you have to go to someone's house and they don't have the foods that you normally eat, so you have to eat like greasier food than you would want. Instead of being like, well, I can't eat exactly what I planned, so I'm gonna binge on pasta and cake and cookies, maybe you can at least be like, well, okay, my ideal plan is not going to happen, so what's the next best thing? And then from there, moderating, like, okay, well, maybe if I can try to hit my protein and moderate my portion sizes, is that a happy medium? Probably. And then going forward with that, to where strictly from an energy balance perspective, your calorie intake will probably be lower than if you had just thrown caution to the wind and completely given up. So
is it the same? Is it the same, the fixed mentality, the fixed mindset, as the binary thinking? That let's say we go out to eat and we maybe have a slip up. We didn't have the choice to do what we regularly do. Is it the same as saying or thinking, okay, all or nothing? Either I do my diet 100%.
They're very, very closely linked. So I would say what you're describing is probably a combination of cognitive rigidity. So in your mind, you're very rigid with how things are supposed to be. That's very, very closely linked with all or nothing mentality. So in the science, it's called cognitive rigidity versus, and then the other one is dichotomous thinking. So I would say they're very, very tightly linked, yet still distinct concepts.
Very well, because I remember a paper you shared recently. I think it was called something as the importance of stupidity in science, something along those lines.
I put it on my feed, actually. It was so good.
Yeah, that one, which I think it's super funny, and it's also curious that you see these kind of titles in the scientific community, because like you mentioned, when we began a diet, when we began a training program, it's not like we're gonna start on being actually good at it. Maybe we're gonna begin sucking a little bit. And the mindset that we need to have in mind is to embrace the suck. Do you think it's kind of along those lines?
Yeah. So I feel like that paper very much embodies the growth mindset. It's like, okay, the paper was about, one of my friends left academia or left grad school, I forget the specifics, because she didn't like that it made her feel stupid. It was something along those lines. And of course, the author of the paper had a very different perspective on what he was experiencing. And it was a good reminder that you're not supposed to be good at, you're not expected to be good at something right away. And that is completely normal. Like when you go to grad school, for example, and you're starting out classes and you feel like you don't belong there because you're not as smart as you feel like, you're unqualified to be there. Or if you're, let's say you're a fitness professional starting to take on clients and you panic because you think they're going to find out that you don't know anything you're talking about, and they're going to fire you or something like that. And the response was, yeah, like you're not supposed to know all the answers. The whole point is you get better as you go. And year one, you is obviously not going to be as experienced and knowledgeable as like year 10 version of you doing the same thing. And I love that it was helping to normalize the whole process of, if you're not good at something, okay, fine. Like that's normal. Keep trying and find areas for improvement and work at them. So I like that because I was getting some questions with it was about my PhD program, for example. And I did talk about, especially on my stories, I was talking a lot about how, yes, I do oftentimes feel imposter syndrome, even though I already have advanced academic degrees in these things. When it comes to my PhD in particular, it's still new for me. And it's demanding things of me, like academically and intellectually, that I didn't have to do before. And because it's new, it's uncomfortable for me. And because I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, of course, I find myself doubting myself. I'm doubting myself and I'm like, all right, but these thoughts are normal. It's okay to have these thoughts and still keep trying. So yeah, that was a really cool paper that I will continually reference.
Yeah, and the title, I just love it. I could print shirts with the title and rock them.
Uh,
And and you mentioned the imposter syndrome. That reminded me of the book Atomic Habits. I'm sure you read it.
yeah,
That we begin a diet, we begin a training program. We need to embrace actually being a quote unquote fit person instead of just thinking I'm on a diet. To
right,
embrace that instead of a fixed mindset, the learning curve, the process that we need to become
right,
better at it. Do you
right.
think there, or in relation to that, Sohee, what do you think in your experience and with your study on it, the most common mindset pitfalls when we begin a training program, a diet, where do we do get stuck the most?
Probably, besides the ones that I've already mentioned, generally being really impatient with the process. So, and obvious, with fitness specifically, focusing on the wrong metrics to
Right.
determine if you are successful or not. So, rather than focusing on your behaviors, you might overlook everything that you're doing every day differently now. All the new things that you're doing now that you were not doing last week, for example, you ignore all the good things you're doing now, and instead you're only looking at, has this, as an example, has the scale weight changed as much as I want it to? Or
Right.
if it's in the gym, how many calories did I burn? Do I feel tired? How much am I sweating? And I feel like those tends to be metrics that a lot of people over focus on, when in reality, I don't have any, like for myself, I don't have any of my clients measure any of those things, because that's actually not what's important, in terms of training and fitness. And so we shift the focus away from outcome goals, right? What is the result of things? Like scale weight is an outcome goal because you can't directly control scale weight. There's stuff that we can do to try to get it to move, but ultimately we're not in full
Right.
control. Whereas we can control our better control, like our hydration, our stress levels, our sleep, our workout program, frequency, consistency. Those are the things that we can control. So I would rather have people shift their focus more to their behavior adherence to the right target behaviors over time, and then kind of just let the results take care of themselves.
I think one important aspect is the reliance on willpower. How can you
Yeah.
talk to your clients, talk to students perhaps? How can we begin to shift the focus instead of willpower on in the construction of habits?
Yeah, so big misconception as it relates to willpower and behavior change is that changing your behaviors long term is all about having as much willpower as possible, or exerting as much willpower as possible. And while willpower is useful for certain things, um,
Right.
it is typically overused and misapplied. So we should not, and what's interesting is actually there are several papers talking about this now too, but this is something that I learned. I came to this conclusion on my own, like from my own anecdotal personal experience years ago. And then after that, I happened to stumble across some papers that actually said the same thing. So that was a really cool thing.
Right.
But what we want to do is you want to use, you want to be very picky about how and when you utilize self-control, willpower. Because if you think about it, it's kind of the flip side of habits. The key feature of habits is that they are automatic. They do not
Totally.
rely on any cognitive effort. So it's the other side of willpower, right? But willpower is still important in the initial formation of a habit. So when a behavior is not yet a habit, when it is not yet quite automatic, you still need to exert some willpower to get that behavior to happen. Of course, the
Right.
amount of willpower you use is going to depend on the size of the habit, the complexity, and all these other factors. But over time, you should have to use less and less and less willpower to execute that specific behavior until the behavior is so automatic that there is no cognitive effort utilized at all. That is the goal. Instead of what a lot of people talk about, and unfortunately a lot of like fitness trainers and practitioners still preach, which is you have to be super hardcore, you have to exert willpower all the time. And
Totally.
that's, quite frankly, that's really exhausting. It feels very fatiguing. And if you try to rely on willpower to change your life, you're going to burn out at some point, guaranteed. So it's much better to be just smarter and more strategic about your approach. So instead of running yourself into the ground, you're thinking, okay, how can I minimize my reliance on willpower, and how can I instead build up the right habits over time that will help me get closer to where I ultimately want to be?
Actually, you touched on a really important subject which I wanted to discuss with you, which is social media. If we search for fitness content, it's always motivation. It's motivation workout, motivation this, motivation that. But motivation runs out and runs out really quickly.
Yeah.
And if we don't know anything about this, we rely on willpower. We take
Yeah.
for granted all this narrative. It can be painful to. I don't feel like it. I don't feel like training. I feel tired. My life is falling apart, and you expect me to be motivated. How can we begin to consume better fitness content? So how can people face this information, this constant battle?
Yeah. I think it's okay. It's really tricky because I think if you're new to the world of fitness, it's very hard to discern who is putting out trustworthy, reliable, quality information versus who is just saying stuff that sounds like it makes sense, but maybe
Right.
it's like pseudoscience, or they took the findings of one study and then reached like a wild conclusion that you can't really make that logical leap, but they're doing it to sell a product or a service or something along those lines to push their own agenda, because obviously there's a lot of that out there.
Right.
And I mean, I fell for a lot of stuff in the beginning too. The first several years of my own fitness journey, I believed basically what anyone said online. I just didn't even occur to me that someone would put out false information online. So even if it was just in a blog post or something, I was like, oh, this is fact. And I think overall, learning to be more skeptical about the information you consume, and if you can find a handful of credible sources, and of course, then the question is, how do you know who's credible and who's not? Generally speaking, I say be careful of people who tend to be very dogmatic with their views. So if they're making very extreme statements like all carbs are horrible, or even something like calorie counting didn't work for me, so it's not going to work for anyone and no one should ever be doing it, because all of these fear-mongering statements. I tend to be very leery of those kinds of pages. Also, I would look for, at least for me, are they someone who, if they make a claim, do they cite their sources, right? Do they, especially things like meta-analyses, systematic reviews and stuff. And of course, not everyone is expected to know the research or even know how to read research, because that is a skill. But if you can give out reasonable advice and, as much as possible, not be super biased about the messages you put across, and not do harm to other people in terms of, like, are you unintentionally or intentionally pushing a disordered eating agenda? Because that happens a lot. So I guess that's what, it is really tricky. For me, it came down to, eventually over time, I came across some people who I really trusted, who I fully believed had the right intent with what they were doing with their careers, and made it a point to sift through what the research says and just try to be like, okay, here's what the research says, instead of being like, what do I want the research to say, and how can I find research that fits my bias? And then when there's new research that comes out that conflicts with their initial advice, they can come back and be like, okay guys, actually there's new research, my recommendations are now changing in light of these new research for you guys, and here's what it means for you, and blah, 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 blah. And stick to those people. You can see them as trusted authority figures, and then whoever they're recommending as trusted follows. I'm like, if I trust you and you recommend someone else in a different area of expertise, I'm obviously, just by association, more likely to then trust that person. And from there, you just build your circle of trusted people. But I think that overall that there's more people in the industry than not probably putting out more incorrect information, which is unfortunate.
And like you said, it's super tricky because sometimes you have medical doctors that actually cite their sources, but they're terribly biased, they're terribly misrepresented. I remember, I don't recall the name of the doctor, but a couple days ago, he was saying that calorie counting didn't work, that
Yeah,
the
yeah.
calories in, calories out
Yeah.
didn't work, and
Doctor saying
it,
that, unfortunately. Yeah.
and if you as an outsider see doctor whoever, you're gonna believe that, and you're gonna get so confused, and
Yeah.
you're gonna get frustrated. And like you said, and that's actually a thought I had for a while now, is that sometimes the fitness professionals, myself included, sometimes we are kind of like the bridge
Yeah.
for disordered eating. If we believe firmly in low carbs diet, okay, so carbs are inherently evil. If you eat carbs, you are breaking the rule.
Yeah.
All this stuff that makes people anxious, that makes you feel terrible about food. And I loved a reel that you did recently, that you mentioned that eating also processed foods, it's also healthy because it gives you this feeling of being free with your diet, that you can consume these
Yeah.
types
That's
of
a
food.
different aspect of health that many people don't
Totally.
consider. Yeah.
Can we talk about a little bit of those other aspects of health besides just eating real food?
Yeah. So I've done several posts on that same topic, kind of like different skits, different angles. But the
Right.
main one line summary is always there's more to health than nutrients alone, right? Health is more than about just what are the nutrients and what you're eating. Is this a nutrient dense food? And I think that's the mistake a lot of people make when they obsess over, oh my God, but that has toxins, which is a whole nother conversation. But it all comes down to context. What else are you, how much of it are you eating? What else are you eating?
Right.
And maybe like what is the function of that particular food in your life? So if you're celebrating your best friend's birthday and she's having some birthday cake, are you going to not partake because you're a clean eater, and then even though you want the cake, and then you end up resentful and bitter, and then later that night you end up binging because you deprived yourself of stuff you would have happily enjoyed. Not only that, but are you feeling shame and neurosis and obsession over food, because those are not healthy either, right? So
Right.
there's a term that within the disordered eating community that which is orthorexia, right? Which is kind of refers to more the like unhealthy obsession with eating healthy.
Right.
And that I see a lot of that. Like I was definitely like that for a while, where you become so obsessed with eating only clean, I put this in heavy quotes, eating only clean foods, that you miss out on life. And it actually has a negative impact on your mental health. So your social life suffers, your relationships with other people suffers, you end up probably crankier, more moody, and maybe you end up experiencing more binge eating, more secretive eating. Like you're more likely to eat these things that you think are bad when no one's watching, like at
Right.
night, or when no one's around, things like that. And overall, it can actually cause you to eat more food over time rather than having to regulate your overall intake. So those are things that I feel like definitely does not get talked about enough when it comes to food. So yes, if it means, obviously, if none of us experience joy from chocolate or cookies or chips, and there was not like so much culture around food, sure, ban all the trans fats, ban all the everything bad, because it has no place in our lives. But you'll also
Right.
find that, like, holidays, there's all these cookies, there's desserts, like they're really yummy. And guess what? I want to partake too. And it's okay. We should be teaching people it's okay to do those things. And that doesn't make you less healthy. It doesn't make you someone who doesn't care about your health. Like you can still have a cookie and prioritize your health at the same time. So it's the whole, like, it's not a dichotomy. It's not this or that. It's like both can exist and both can be true at the same time. What matters is not just what are you doing once in a while, because a lot of times I feel like people take like one isolated behavior and then use that to then characterize your entire being, right? Like, oh my God, you're eating one
Right.
piece of cake, you must be a really unhealthy person. That's like, okay, but have you seen everything else that I've eaten today is actually, all these veggies, these fruits, these lean proteins, etc., complex carbs, and this is just one slice within the context of everything else, that actually makes me really healthy. Plus, I'm sleeping well, I'm managing my stress, I'm exercising regularly, etc., etc., etc. So I'm like, this is just one. The nutrient density of a food is simply one small component of dozens and dozens of components of what make up health. Yeah, that's probably
Yeah,
it.
I think I think it's more of a threshold, right? Like we said in the beginning, it's okay to identify as a quote unquote again fit person, but not to the extent that if you eat a cookie, if you eat a slice of cake, you're suddenly betraying all your beliefs. You are not a fit person. All your hard work it's gone to the dump because you eat a cookie, you enjoy a slice of cake because it was your mother's birthday, something like that.
Yeah.
We need to actually get into the threshold of being healthy in all regards, not just food, not just training. If we miss a training session, what do you what do you say to your clients when they have a slip up, as they call it? Because I don't like to call it slip ups because,
Yeah.
as you said, life happens. What do you say to your clients, Sophie?
I think that the coach's response is crucial in how they learn to perceive those kinds of incidences. So for me, if they're like, I had some cake, it was my grandma's birthday, and it was like carrot cake, my favorite, etc., and I feel like it tasted really good, but I feel kind of bad about it, I say, you know what? This is a quality of life win, like a quality of life victory, because you were prioritizing your overall happiness and you were prioritizing your personal relationship with your grandma in this case. And good for you. I'm like, awesome job. I hope it was delicious. No big deal. Moving on. That is it. You don't have to make a big deal of it.
That's pretty
Definitely
cool.
don't want to say, oh, well, I'm going to give you 3 hours of cardio tomorrow. Like, don't do any of that. Don't do any of the like, well, I'm cutting your carbs tomorrow. Bring your calories down. Like, none of those things are helpful. In fact, they're actually very harmful. Any kind of like, I think those kinds of compensatory behaviors can be really, really very much a slippery slope. So yeah, I just say, you know what? Awesome. I love carrot cake. Whatever. I'm so happy for you. Let's move on.
Enjoy life.
That's it. Really.
Sure.
And then they're like, oh, I thought you were going to yell at me, but oh, interesting. Okay. And then it teaches them, oh, I don't have to feel guilty about these things.
Right.
And you develop more of a safe, you create that safe environment with your client where they continue to feel safe opening up to you about whatever it is that they're struggling with, or whenever they have a slip up, or when they make a mistake, they're more likely to actually tell you about it rather than lying to you and pretending like everything's cool. Yeah.
Very well. So, Sohi, I know you're really tight on time. So, just to almost finish,
Yeah.
how can we help people to create new habits, to create this healthy relationship, not just with food, but with
Yeah.
our training program, with life happening around us? How can we begin as fitness professionals to do that a little better?
Okay. Well, I think the repeated reminders are really important. And if you follow me for any length of time, you'll know that I repeat the same messages over and over all the time. And that's very intentional because I know a lot of times, especially if we grew up being taught like sugar is bad, carbs are bad, don't eat after 6, like believing all these myths, it can sometimes take a long time to unlearn those things. But even if I can show that not only am I teaching you these messages, but I'm showing that I live that life. I walk the walk. I'm not just telling you what to do. You can see me actually living that exact way. You might be like, oh, well, if she's having carbs at dinner every night with bigger portions than I thought a woman should be eating, like, what some
Totally.
women are taught, you're only supposed to eat this tiny portions. And I'm like, no, I like my portions big. And they're like, oh, well, she eats like that all the time and she's happy and she's not stressed about food. And I didn't know this was possible. And she's exercising regularly, but not being obsessed over it. How can maybe I'm going to be more open-minded to what she has to say. And then, I think people start to slowly come around in that way. But even if you're not a fitness professional, even if you're just someone who's interested in fitness, you can still spread the good, the right messages and still educate
Totally.
your friends, your family. You don't have to lecture them, but even just by your own behaviors, people will pick up on what you're doing and they'll learn from your actions. And I think that that in itself is really powerful. And overall, just kind of not tolerating any kind of unhealthy messaging, like, you know, the detox diets, the anything diet culture wise, any messages about you have to look a certain way, or you have to eat a certain way, or you have to exercise a certain way, or anything like that. Generally speaking, just kind of encouraging people to eat and exercise in a way that they enjoy, while still obviously at the same time encouraging, let's try a new vegetable today, or, you know, something along those lines, where it always has a very positive twist on things, and you're not food shaming, you're not exercise shaming, you're not using exercise as punishment, and you're always thinking, like, how can I enjoy this process more? So I think those are really good ways to make a positive impact.
And lift heavy weights, right?
And lift weights. Even, yeah, everyone can lift. It's never too late to begin.
Very well. So, Sohee, I can thank you enough for your time. It's been a huge pleasure. It's been a huge honor. So, if you're sometime in Mexico, you're very welcome.
What part of Mexico are you in?
I mean, the state is called Michoacán.
Okay, I've not heard of it.
Have you been in Mexico before?
We were in Cabo for 3.5 months.
That's.
But I know that's like the west.
Right.
Very west.
Very well. So say hi to Ollie. I'm glad he's doing better.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, Sohee.
You too.
See ya.
Bye.